And a great view of some of those procedures as Nicole airs. Again, you can see her with that right hand turning the crank and working on that hatch to continue those procedures. You can see her with that right hand turning the crank and working on that hatch to continue those procedures. You can see her with that right hand turning the crank and working on that hatch to continue those procedures.
Dragon,
Station,
this is Houston on the big loop for a comm check.
Working on that hatch to continue those procedures.
Dragon, Station, this is Houston on the big loop for a comm check.
Working on that hatch to continue those procedures.
Dragon, Station, this is Houston on the big loop for a comm check.
Dragon has you loud and clear.
Dragon, Station, this is Houston on the big loop for a comm check.
Dragon has you loud and clear.
Dragon, Station, this is Houston on the big loop for a comm check.
Dragon has you loud and clear.
Dragon, Station, this is Houston on the big loop for a comm check.
Houston, Dragon on the big loop. We have you loud and clear.
And Dragon, we read you the same.
Continuing with her hatch opening procedures. Docking of Axiom Mission 4 to the orbiting laboratory occurred about an hour and 10 minutes ago at 5:31 a.m. Central, and since then the crews for both station and inside Dragon have been going through those procedures and making sure everything is as it needs to be, including the proper leak checks and stowage from both perspectives, before continuing on with hatch opening procedures and welcoming remarks. We'll continue to provide updates, and you'll hear calls on the big loop of all four parties: NASA's Mission Control in the International Space Station Flight Control Room, SpaceX in Hawthorne, California, and the teams and the Expedition 73 crew aboard the International Space Station, and Axiom Mission 4 aboard the Dragon and Grace
Dragon, Houston on the big
spacecraft.
loop. Stand by for hardline audio config.
Dragon copies.
Also a part of these procedures, and once hatch opening continues to move along, the crews will install IMV ducting to help mix the air of the space station environment with the air inside of Dragon and seal up some of those lithium hydroxide cartridges that scrub the carbon dioxide inside of the Dragon spacecraft. And that was on their ride to the International Space Station. They'll also check some vent valves as we go, and maybe need a little bit more time on board, but these last final checks are crucial to make sure everything is good to go, since it will remain docked to the International Space Station for nearly 2 weeks. With the arrival of Axiom Mission 4 and the Dragon Grace spacecraft, newly named and given by Peggy Whitson, commander of Axiom Mission 4, shortly after launch yesterday morning, that now brings 5 spacecraft to the International Space Station: 2 Dragon spacecraft, a Soyuz MS-27 spacecraft, and 2 Progress vehicles, cargo vehicles, attached to the orbiting outpost. For Dragon, it is Endurance and Grace, connected to the forward and now zenith ports of the Harmony module, with 2 Progress vehicles and that Soyuz MS-27 also connected. And once the Axiom Mission 4 crew makes its way aboard station, that'll bring, since 1998, 288 visitors to the orbital outpost. Nicole Ayers, NASA astronaut, has returned to inside the pressurized mating adapter and working on the APAS hatch and hatch opening procedures, as we continue to get great
Dragon,
views from
Houston on the
inside the
big loop.
International Space
Com
Station.
check. Hardline audio configuration complete, and we have resolved the audio issues on C2P2.
That sounds great, because we have you loud and clear.
We read you the same.
And that was a good communications checkout from from the teams on the ground up to Dragon Grace on the C2V2 line, common communications for visiting vehicles, and that communications line connecting all parties. As we continue to work through hatch opening procedures, and again targeting approximately 8:35 a.m. Central Time for welcoming remarks as the International Space Station and Expedition 73 crew bring in and welcome aboard Axiom Mission 4. Both the orbiting laboratory and the newly docked SpaceX Dragon spacecraft over the northern Pacific Ocean, about to cross into the west coast of North America, right along the U.S.-Canadian border. And also around that time, we will start seeing an orbital daytime period as Dragon and the International Space Station have been orbiting in a nighttime phasing. Currently experiencing a satellite handover period, and we'll continue to bring you the live views from the International Space Station, both inside or exterior. Once communications is established, which should be here in the next few moments. Until then, you can see on this map where exactly we're talking about, where the station and Dragon orbiting over the Pacific Ocean and about to cross over North America and over the northernmost territories of Canada. As we wait for those communications to return, to recap, Axiom Mission 4 has connected with the International Space Station after launching from NASA's Kennedy Space Center yesterday morning at 1:31 a.m. Central Time to connect with the space station at 5:31 a.m. Central this morning. So a little more than a day's transit, and where it would execute a sequence of burns to raise its altitude and close the distance between Dragon Grace and the International Space Station through a phase burn, boost burn, close burn, transfer burn, and then eventually the co-elliptic burn, to make sure that the spacecraft is on the same pathway as the International Space Station and able to make its way up and over top of it to connect to the space-facing port of the Harmony module, the Node 2 Zenith port. As we now get views back inside of the International Space Station, that is a view from the other side. We mentioned the space-facing port that is looking up into where the hatchways will be to allow for the Axiom Mission 4 crew to pass through and be brought aboard the International Space Station. For Peggy Whitson, commander of Axiom Mission 4, her second flight as an Axiom commander after previously serving as commander of Axiom Mission 2. This is her 5th flight and return to the International Space Station, where she continues to build on an impressive career, the most experienced United States astronaut entered the mission with 675 days to her credit, and will certainly add to that record-setting total in her time aboard the orbiting laboratory, and bringing up pilot Shubhanshu Shukla of ISRO, Sławosz Uznański-Wiśniewski of Polsa, and Tibor Kapu of Hunor. And for Shukla, Uznański-Wiśniewski, and Kapu, representing India, Poland, and Hungary, respectively, for those nations, it'll be their first time coming to the International Space Station. Nicole Ayers. And the last one into the hatch, I believe that was Anne McLean making her way in as they continue to work through hatch opening procedures. In the middle there, that is Expedition 73 Commander Takuya Onishi of JAXA. And then you just momentarily saw NASA astronaut Johnny Kim float in and out of view as the crew working together to continue these procedures, moving around some equipment, and to allow for the access to the APAS hatch. After successful vestibule pressurization and checks. And that's the operations that Nicole Ayers is working on right now with Takuya Onishi. And Johnny Kim with camera in hand to document these procedures. And again, just on the other side of this hatchway is where the Axiom Mission 4 crew going through procedures of their own, inventory and doffing their suits that they wore on the uphill ride to their initial orbit. And after an off-duty period would put back on for those dynamic phases of flight, starting with the approach initiation burn that occurred earlier this morning. If you are just joining us, good morning from Mission Control in Houston in the International Space Station Flight Control Room, as we are looking live inside of the International Space Station as NASA astronauts Nicole Ayers and Anne McLean, alongside with Commander of Expedition 73 and JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi, going through a hatch opening procedures. And there you can see as the team has worked together to open up that APAS hatch and continue on with those procedures to welcome aboard eventually the Axiom Mission 4 crew with the welcome remarks currently still targeting.
On the big loop, the APAS hatch is open and no condensation observed on the seals.
Houston copies. Looks great. Thank you.
And a perfect call down right there, as that is the APAS hatch that we were just mentioning that Nicole Ayers and team have opened up, and radioing down the status and condition of that hatch with no condensation reported. And as Nicole Ayers continues to work on that hatch, you'll also see that hatch be covered up to give an extra level of safety to allow for the Axiom Mission 4 team to pass smoothly without having to worry about any additional hazards as they pass through the vestibule and pressurized mating adapter and eventually into the Harmony module of the International Space Station. Another step in this hatch opening procedure is the removal of the docking cross, which it looks like that is what Nicole Ayers is working on as we speak. And you sometimes catch glimpses of it on the docking procedures that was exposed to the vacuum of space to help provide targeting for visiting vehicles. But that'll be another step in this hatch opening process, again, to help clear the way for that pass-through between the Dragon SpaceX Grace spacecraft and the International Space Station. Hatch opening procedures continuing to move along for the teams aboard the International Space Station and Axiom Mission 4 as we draw closer and closer to the anticipated hatch opening and eventual welcome remarks. And we thank you for tuning in and joining us this morning as we are live from the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, Texas, monitoring Nicole Ayers as she continues to work through those step-by-step procedures. As the hatchway, there you see the large square structure just off to the right-hand side of our field of view with that window in the middle was opened up.
Houston on the big loop. Just want to clarify, we want the standoff cross stowed in the standoff cross cover bag.
Houston Station copies.
And that's the teams here on the ground assisting the astronauts on board the station with those hatch opening procedures. As again, that zenith hatchway we were just mentioning before the comms opened to the right that allowed Nicole Ayers and team to pass through. And that docking cross that was just removed will be inserted into its own bag. And there is NASA astronaut Ann McLean to join Ayers in the hatchway and continue on with those procedures as they now look to cover up the APAS hatch, which was just opened a few moments ago, to provide an extra layer of safety and protection for astronauts passing through.
Dragon, suit drying is complete.
And Dragon, we copy on the big loop, suit drying complete.
Good insight there from the Axiom Mission 4 perspective of their procedures that they are currently going through in anticipation of hatch opening, and welcome remarks as they make their way into the International Space Station after connecting and docking to the International Space Station about an hour and a half ago, 5:31 a.m. Central, 6:31 a.m. Eastern. They went through their procedures, inventory, and stowage, and doffing of their suits that they wore from launch yesterday morning from Cape Canaveral, Florida, at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, and then during the dynamic portions of operations, and are now settling into their flight suits that they will bring in and wear as they cruise into the International Space Station. And that's the view we see from the orbiting laboratory is NASA astronaut Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers working through their procedures for hatch opening. The APAS hatch is open after successful vestibule pressurization and checks. They are now covering up that APAS hatch.
SpaceX Dragon in step 5 of 2.102. We're waiting your go for hatch open.
Dragon, SpaceX copies on the big loop. You are standing by for hatch opening. We are waiting for hardline connections to be complete. I'll call back with a go.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to rush you.
And there you heard Axiom Mission 4 Commander Peggy Whitson radioing down to the team at SpaceX. They are awaiting the go for hatch opening. I'd imagine the crew aboard the Dragon gray spacecraft anxious and excited to float into the International Space Station for the very first time. And you just saw that orange ductwork or hose-like piece of equipment that Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers were just operating with. That's a part of helping mix the air between the International Space Station and the Dragon spacecraft. They'll continue to check some vent valves as well, so it just might be a little bit more time before we welcome the crew on board. But these final checks, again, critical to making sure that everything is good and sealed tight with no leaks and no issues, as Dragon Grace will be docked to the International Space Station for approximately the next 2 weeks.
Houston, SpaceX station is ready for Dragon hatch equalization.
Houston, copy. Stand by.
Another step in those hatch opening procedures is Nicole Ayers just radioed down for the SpaceX Dragon hatch pressurization and equalization. As you see the pop of flash bulbs aboard the International Space Station being documented, and plenty of smiles from the Expedition 73 crew as we draw closer and closer to hatch opening and welcoming Axiom Mission 4 aboard the orbital outpost. Meanwhile, here on the ground inside NASA's Mission Control, the International Space Station Flight Control Room, anticipation also building up as the room starting to fill with NASA leadership, as well as the Athena flight team continuing to work through the hatch opening procedures. Flight Director Allison Bollinger closely monitoring every step of the way as Nicole Ayer is continuing to work through each checkpoint on her list. That's what you saw on the little tablet that she was referring to, making sure every step is covered as she is now floated back into the pressurized mating adapter across the APAS hatch.
Station Houston on the big loop. We're still working some ground config actions before we're ready for equalization. In the meantime, can we get confirmation that the standoff cross went into the standoff cross bag? We were unable to tell from the video.
It was in there when you guys called. Thanks.
Copy, thanks.
Hearing communications from teams on the ground as they continue to work through hatch opening procedures and making sure all pressurization and leak checks are good and everything equal between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station before the hatches can be formally opened on both sides. You can see into this hatchway, the space-facing port, or into the space-facing side of the Harmony module aboard the International Space Station and the International Docking Adapter that welcomed the connection of Axiom Mission 4 at 5:31 a.m. Central Time earlier this morning. And since then, the crews aboard both the Dragon Gray spacecraft and International Space Station have been diligently working and continue to monitor the progress of that hatch opening with teams on the ground also following suit.
Station Dragon Houston on the big loop. Stand by for equalization. Expected to take 1 minute.
Station copies 1 minute.
Dragon copies 1 minute.
Great communications there from all teams here at NASA's Johnson Space Center and International Space Station Mission Control Room, teams in the SpaceX in Hawthorne, California, and everyone aboard the Dragon SpaceX Grace in Axiom Mission 4 and the International Space Station as we continue to march towards the hatch opening to welcome Axiom Mission 4 aboard the orbiting laboratory.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, you are go for hatch opening per the decal, followed by the remaining actions in procedure 4.400, section 6.
Dragon copies. Go for hatch open and remainder of steps in 4.400.
We are go for hatch opening is what you have just heard. If you are just now joining us, you are tuned into live coverage of the arrival of Axiom Mission 4, the International Space Station.
And SpaceX Dragon, hatch is coming open.
SpaceX copies.
Can it really be that long? Yes, okay. Put it in my pocket.